It's a huge honor to be here, and my eyes have been opened. I just joined this science advisory group, and I'm an engineer. I've worked in sustainable fish production systems for 35 years with the Conservation Fund, and then now at Superior Fresh. And it's amazing to see the evidence that omega-3s in fish are super good for you. So this is a little bit of a turn. We're focusing on how do we get the fish to market from a production standpoint. And I've spent 26 years at the Conservation Fund, where protecting land and water resources are a focus. And with U.S. Department of Agriculture research funding, we studied how to produce fish in land-based systems using a minimal water footprint and capturing the waste and excluding pathogens and operating ideally with no pesticides or antibiotics to produce very healthy fish to feed the U.S. with an American domestically produced product. And then at 7 years ago approximately, I went to work at Superior Fresh, and Superior Fresh has been in the market since 2018, every week putting Atlantic salmon into the market, and also producing millions of pounds of organic leafy greens using a glass greenhouse, 13 acres, where the nutrients produced by the fish are reclaimed for other human food and also for regenerative farming. So in this presentation, I get to talk a little bit about repeating from a more simplistic standpoint why or how high omega-3 fish are good for you. Focusing and then how do we produce fish in the USA and why do we produce salmon? Salmon's the #1 fish consumed in the U.S., and then why land-based salmon farming, which is very different from how fish are also produced. So this is a review, and I found it extremely exciting to study our fish and to understand, to tell consumers why they're healthy, to tell the owners why we're raising the fish this way, why are we spending more money on the feed to provide a fish that has higher omega-3, because it's better for the consumer. It's also better for those fish. They have better welfare. So omega-3 polyunsaturated fatty acids are essential. That means the body doesn't make them. You have to get them from food. And the two most important, if you've heard, EPA and DHA, mainly come from fish. They mainly come from marine oils. And they have all the benefits we've heard about. And I've always thought about the benefits to the heart and to the brain and didn't realize all the other benefits they have. But what's important is that I think, I've dwelled on this, is that alpha-linoleic acid, which is an omega-3 that sits alongside the EPA and DHA, the body and the fish, the humans and fish, they use it for energy, but it doesn't convert in fish very efficiently into EPA and DHA. So for them to get the healthy omega-3s, the best omega-3s, they need to consume it in the marine oil. It's not going to be produced from something else or very inefficiently. I say this all the time, you are what you eat and so are the fish. They are what they eat. And it's important, we've been hearing over and over again, to get so many milligrams or grams of EPA and DHA per 100-gram portion, 3.5 ounce portion. And the salmon industry and the industry in North America has looked at what is in the grocery store. This is a study by Dr. Colombo in Canada, and what's in the grocery stores in Canada, just done in 2020. And it shows that the farmed fish, whether they were from Atlantic salmon that were normal or organic certified or organic certified Chinook salmon, they have high levels of omega-3, 700 to 900 milligrams. They looked at some of the wild salmon available, and wild salmon, so Atlantic salmon is a species, and then there's 5 or 6 species of wild salmon that are Pacific. These are Pacific salmon, and they can be harvested at different locations at different times. So this is a snapshot that can have a lot of variation depending on where you get your fish, when you get it, what watershed it came from, when it was harvested. But they have 2,500 milligrams of EPA and DHA, not just omega-3s, but EPA and DHA for a 100-gram 3.5 ounce portion. And the wild pink didn't have as much, but there's a large variation. So I go out to eat when I travel, and I have to travel way too much. In the U.S. now, you go to the restaurant, and there's mostly salmon everywhere I go. And most of my colleagues buy steak. And they're buying an 8-ounce, a 12-ounce, a 16-ounce steak. And I want that too in my salmon, because I always buy salmon instead of steak. And I'll buy wild salmon, I'll buy farm salmon. So an 8-ounce salmon, Superior Fresh, we have about 2,100 milligrams of EPA and DHA in it. And I eat it almost every day. That's almost 5,000 milligrams in an 8-ounce portion. So you can get yourself super high doses just by eating an 8-ounce portion of salmon. And most of those salmon have a tremendous level of EPA and DHA. And I'll sit with the guys and they'll be saying, well, I'm going to eat my grass-fed beef. When you look up the science on grass-fed beef, EPA and DHA, it's only 10 milligrams to 14 milligrams. So they're not getting it. There's almost 100 times more in salmon. And then when you look at other foods, tuna is an excellent source. A lot of seafood's an excellent source. But I love to eat nuts and almonds. They have ALA, but they don't have EPA and DHA, 0. So it's important to know what foods you can get to provide yourself with a healthy diet. And it's anti-inflammatory. And I'm hearing that over and over again. And salmon farmers are in business, and the price of feed and the sustainability of harvesting from the ocean means that they're feeding a lot more omega-6s, which are vegetable oils. So when you substitute out omega-3s, you have omega-6s, and this you have lower omega-3s. And omega-6s, that first thing I did, I sat down next to Joe yesterday, and I was saying, Joe, tell me about omega-6s. What's the consequence? And there's actually some pretty negative consequences to having a lot of linoleic acid. But the big, simple things for someone who's not a nutritionist, I'm a chemical engineer, is eating more omega-3s is anti-inflammatory, and the omega-6s tend to be inflammatory. So they're the gasoline, Joe said, that goes on the fire when you have inflammation. And it was amazing to be here to have the argument about worrying about mercury in salmon or in other fish just disappear, because there's so much high selenium. It says in the handouts we can eat 50 pounds of salmon a week and still not worry about mercury. So I eat a lot of salmon. I eat 3 or 4 pounds a week, but 50 pounds you could eat. I think that's incredible. And then I'm getting older, I'm achy joints. I want to have collagen. I always eat the skin. It's very crispy. It's high in collagen. You get the selenium, antioxidants, vitamin B. A lot of great reasons to eat salmon. They're a superfood. So salmon is the most consumed fish in the USA. That's profound. Over 1 billion pounds are produced globally just to feed the U.S. market. Now that's mostly Atlantic salmon, but it's also wild Pacific salmon. And I wish we had more wild Pacific salmon. It's a great product. But the U.S. has grown in salmon consumption over 20% a year during the 2 COVID years, but over the last 10 to 12 years, it's been averaging about 8% growth year over year in salmon consumption in the U.S. And there's just not enough wild salmon to meet that demand, and farmed Atlantic salmon is the most predominant fish consumed in the U.S. Unfortunately, 95% of that salmon is imported. Most of the salmon is produced elsewhere, even though we're the world's largest salmon market. About 5 million pounds of salmon are produced globally, and if you think about how much cattle, poultry, and hogs the U.S. produces, that's tiny. 5 billion pounds is almost a rounding error compared to what we produce for terrestrial animals in the U.S., but it's a very healthy food. And Norway and Chile produce about 80% of what we consume in the U.S., and that, to get here fresh, is shipped by air freight. And when we think about sustainability, if you haven't realized, the carbon footprint of the food production method is one aspect, but if you air freight it, you just dominated the carbon footprint with your life cycle assessment. So I worked on a publication that looked at using pumps and all the energy to recycle water in a land-based system, so we have zero wastewater discharge. And then when you compare the carbon footprint to shipping the fish from Norway, produced in Norway with air freight, well, the carbon footprint's higher. But salmon are produced in the ocean in some of the most pristine environments, and I'm glad that we have all these salmon to eat. So land-based salmon have been assessed by the Monterey Bay Aquarium Seafood Watch. They're ranked best choice. We've never used antibiotics or pesticides with the fish. When I worked at the Freshwater Institute and raised salmon for 26 years with trout, we never used antibiotics or pesticides. Whoa, now we're going into the automatic mode. That's scary. Go back one. You can maximize food safety and traceability because you close the environment in land-based systems. I said air freight. You minimize environmental impact. You can protect the water resources because you're hardly using any water resource when you recycle 99.9% of the water. And you can give back to the land with this regenerative agriculture practices. So quickly, places can use 99.9% of the water. That means the only water that leaves is such a small amount, it's a spill, that we can irrigate that on the crop. So we have zero wastewater discharge. There's zero pollution to the surface waters with this kind of production method. When we irrigate, we're irrigating native grasses and alfalfa, and the hay that's harvested off those fields is going to bedding and feed for cattle and other livestock. And then you reclaim the biosolids that the feces, you mineralize it, you can then inject it in the corn and soybean fields. That's done every year. And the offal, which if it's not being sold to pet food, can be made into an organic soil amendment and a compost and applied to fields to a soil amendment. So there's a lot of ways to give back to the land when you raise the salmon on the land. So in summary, eating seafood gives you the EPA and DHA you can't get elsewhere. And salmon's a great choice, and I think it's amazing salmon's the #1 fish now consumed in the U.S. It can be raised on land, it can be raised in net pens, it can be caught by fishers in Alaska or other areas. Paying attention to how the fish is produced and sustainability is always important. And when we raise salmon on land, we have a chance to reclaim the nutrients. Fish, salmon waste 80% of the phosphorus and 60% of the nitrogen they're fed. Those are the very valuable nutrients. And if they're not captured, they just pollute. So when you capture them, you can use them and repurpose them. So I wanted to conclude with that. Thank you.
Are there any questions?
What supermarkets can we get your fish in?
Most of our salmon are sold within a 400-mile radius of our farm in Wisconsin. We have a new farm in Indiana as we're growing, but the fish won't be there until 2 more years. In the East Coast, the first market we went into was Mom's Organic Market in this area. We were the first salmon they decided to sell because they believe in our sustainability story. And now we're also in Wegmans.
Joe Hiblin here. This is again a wonderful product and a wonderful presentation and hits a lot of issues of regenerating soil in the U.S. and in the world. What do you see as your major barriers or major hurdles for your company to sell salmon and get your message out further than 400 miles? What are the barriers?
Well, the U.S. salmon market is huge, and we are producing less than 1% of the market. All of our salmon have always been sold, so we don't have enough salmon to spread everywhere. So we have so many more people asking to buy our salmon than we have available. It's a good problem to have. For us to expand, we are expanding now threefold. We will become the second largest salmon producer, we think. There's not a lot of salmon producers in the U.S. And it's an investment that's capital intensive, and the market loves it, so we have to have consumers that are willing to pay for this product. So when you go, we are not the cheapest product on the market, but there is a tiered market in salmon, so there are a lot of people that want to pay more for that product.